Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, today in the news, Katan, we're going to first talk about Pope Francis and a couple comments that he made regarding the Sabbath day, actually in an interview that he did with 60 Minutes. Okay. We had another deadly school shooting this week, this time in Texas. Also, we're going to look at the cost of America's war on terrorism over the past 16 years, quite a staggering number there. Right. And finally, we're going to play a video from the UN Security Council as they met once again over the opening of the American Embassy in Jerusalem. Some members are trying, they're actually pushing to revive the two-state solution. Well, all this and more, but first we begin with viruses, some old and some new. Now, we know hog conditions in America have been pretty tough, but now a new virus in pigs is threatening the safety of humans.
Interesting. The porcine Delta coronavirus, which is sometimes deadly to pigs, has now been found to cross into different species. That means the virus could be transmitted to humans. The virus was first discovered in 2012 on hog farms in China. 2 years later, the virus was found in the United States during an outbreak of diarrhea in Ohio. Other countries have also detected the coronavirus.
Not only do infected pigs experience diarrhea, but also vomiting and in some cases death. Now, a new study has traced the same virus back to birds before pigs and is now saying it can be transmitted to people as well.
Researcher Scott Kinney from the College of Veterinary Medicine at Ohio State University says future research is actually going to take a look at human blood samples to see if they've been exposed to the virus. Contracting the virus, Kinney says, will depend on the virus's ability to bind to receptors on the cells of the animal or human.
Now, symptoms in people may be diarrhea or cold-like symptoms, and Scott Kinney told RT there are a lot of different viruses that cause these types of diseases, and doctors sometimes don't look at the causative factors in depth. They just treat the symptoms in their patients, so they don't really see that these diseases are what they're fighting against. They're just treating the symptoms, as you said.
That's right. Interesting. Well, public health experts are alarmed by this new discovery and worry about the outbreak of the coronavirus, which they say is similar to SARS and MRSA, both life-threatening viruses that they currently don't have any cures for on the market. Right. None of their vaccines or antibiotics.
Well, halfway around the world, Central Africa is experiencing a health crisis of its own. Just 2 years ago, an Ebola epidemic quieted down, but now health experts are calling a new case, quote, a major game changer. Now, a new deadly outbreak in the Congo has now spread to a densely populated city.
There has been reports of a case of Ebola in the city of Mbandaka, which has a population of almost 350,000. Up until this report, there was 44 potential cases and 23 deaths in the remote rural area of Bikoro. However, Bikoro is located close to the heavily traveled Congo River, which connects travelers not only to Mbandaka to the north, but also to the capital city of Kinshasa, which has more than 9 million residents to the south. Wow. So I see they're kind of worried about that potentially spreading and going viral very fast.
Right. Well, there is a great fear of the virus spreading rapidly if indeed it does reach these large urban areas. Now, the result of which could be a devastating death toll. In 2014, Western Africa experienced an Ebola epidemic which killed 11,000 people.
Wow. Well, since that time, an experimental vaccine has been developed and already 4,000 doses have arrived in Central Africa, with thousands more soon to follow. So far, more than 500 people have come in contact with the virus. The plan is to immunize those infected and hopefully stop the virus from spreading further. But again, this is an experimental vaccine, so they're not really sure of the long-term effects. Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, there was another deadly school shooting this week, this time in Sante Fe, Texas. Now, our field correspondent Larry McGee has been covering the details. Now, Larry, I understand that things are probably still changing and new details are coming in, but what can you tell us right now? What do you know about this latest deadly school shooting?
In yet another school shooting, 10 people are reported to have been killed, this time at a high school in Sante Fe, Texas. 2 suspects are reportedly being held by authorities in connection with the shooting. One is believed to have been the gunman, but the role of the second suspect is yet to be clearly established. True to what has become common concerning these sorts of tragedies, the person believed to be the triggerman was actually a 17-year-old student at the school. Witnesses report that the thunder of gunfire began just after the school bell rang, and while that tragically took the lives of 10 people, the discovery of explosives in the school later on shows that the suspect intended to do a lot more damage. Ironically, in just 4 weeks prior to the shooting, many of Sante Fe's students had participated in a national walk out of school campaign to try and raise awareness and urge action concerning school shootings, which have been a constant and increasing presence since 2007, though not every incident receives large-scale media attention. What is receiving much attention, however, and has similarly and also been a continuing and worsening issue in our society, is the criminal and appalling practice of pedophilia by the priests of the Universal Church. Recently, all of Chile's 34 bishops offered to resign due to more accusations of child molestations against the Catholic Church. The usual cover-up concerning the alleged predators was also an issue. The clerics are said to have tendered their offering in a document presented at a 3-day meeting held at the Vatican, where it was reported that the Pope handed the men a document of his own, accusing them of negligence concerning child sex abuse. It has not yet been made evident as to whether or not Pope Francis will accept the bishop's offer to resign, but until the final decision is made, the officials say they will continue to work. In other papal news, Pope Francis employed the assistance of a major network recently to offer the Vatican's perspective on the Sabbath. The pontiff started off by acknowledging that the original and scriptural day of rest is the 7th day of the week. Pope Francis then added that this is the day of rest observed by those who are regarded as Jews, and that it, the Sabbath, should be considered holy. Following the lead of those who keep and promote the 7th-day Sabbath, the pontiff is now encouraging the world to rest on the 7th day of the week and to use that time as an opportunity to grow closer to one's family and to play. According to the pontiff, we are not machines, and out of gratitude, one day is the least that we can do. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Katan, now that's interesting that the Pope mentioned there that the Sabbath is Saturday, even though the Catholic Church has all their worship on Sunday, but yet he just told all his followers that keeping the Sabbath day holy should be done on Saturday. So it seems very confusing. If I was a follower of the Catholic Church, I'd be wondering, are we switching back to Saturday now, or are we going with Sunday?
Yeah, and the fact that he said, well, you know, it's a time people can go out and play and do whatever they want to do, where most would argue that the Sabbath is actually considered a day of rest. So I guess we'll see what he has to decide a little bit more in the future in regards to that statement. Well, America's war on terror from the years of 2002 in the era of President George W. Bush until 2017 has cost the American taxpayers almost $3 trillion, $2.8 trillion to be exact. Now, this was spent on counter-terrorism efforts. The amount wasn't included in the $886 billion allotted to the U.S. military in 2017 and is more than the combined military spending of Russia, India, and South Korea combined. Yeah.
Well, only 59 Americans died by jihadist attacks, while 20,000 died from opioid overdoses, 38,000 from gun-related deaths, and 630,000 from heart disease, all in 2016. Now, while the U.S. military spent trillions, the Pentagon and CIA spent billions arming and training militant groups that worked with the terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Syria. So a lot of that money was spent in that training. But again, 59 deaths there by the jihadist groups when we have all these other situations taking place in America. It seems like, why not spend that money in dealing with those issues?
Yeah, educating and providing the resources so people can make better choices in their health. Well, without ending the war on terror, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis said that the U.S. national defense strategy would shift from the war on terror to countering the Chinese and Russian military, as well as North Korea and Iran.
In the face of the U.S.'s decision to pull out of the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement, the rest of the European Union members involved in that pact said they will remain committed to the agreement. Federica Mogherini reiterated their commitment to keep the agreement in place and regretted the U.S.'s decision to withdraw. Now, she also said that steps leading to oil trading and banking with Iran will also be discussed.
The European Commission has taken to using something called a blocking status to get around U.S. sanctions against Iran. It goes into effect in 2 months, but could be put into force earlier if need be. Everything from airplanes to logistics to energy, European companies are in the running for contracts with Iran that would otherwise be jeopardized with the U.S.'s pullout from the Iran deal. Now, the statute doesn't recognize any court ruling and bans any EU member from any EU member state from complying with the sanctions. Member state governments and parliament, of course, can overrule the measure. So they're finding a way where they can continue to conduct business irregardless of the sanctions that the United States is placing on not only Iran, but how it affects the other countries that deal with them as well.
Well, we mentioned earlier about a video, and this one is from a UN meeting where tensions were high regarding violence in the Middle East. Now, U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley and other representatives responded to violence related to the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, which the U.S. just recently recognized as the capital of Jerusalem, along with the two-state solution. Take a look at this meeting.
Madam President, tens of thousands of people in Gaza have been protesting for over 6 weeks now. People who live in abject poverty, who survive in prison-like conditions, who live with no prospect for the day after. These people want their voices heard. They want a future beyond mere survival. Their leaders have failed them. The promises that they have made to them have not been delivered. And now the people are angry. But their anger, if not channeled in a constructive manner, will lead to more destruction and suffering. Thank you.
And now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Today's session was called to discuss the issue of violence in the Middle East. We are all concerned about violence in the Middle East. The United States deplores the loss of human life. But there is a lot of violence throughout the region. And I will note that the double standard is all too common in this chamber and working overtime today. Today's meeting was called to discuss the violence that some suggest was connected with yesterday's opening of the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. For some people, the embassy opening is said to be a reason to engage in violence. How is that justified? As our president said when he announced the decision in December, the location of our embassy has no bearing on the specific boundaries of Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders. It has no bearing on Jerusalem's holy sites. It does not prejudge whatever the parties might negotiate in a peace agreement. It does not undermine the prospects for peace in any way. And yet, for some, this is supposedly a cause for violence.
And now I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Madam President, we've seen a concatenation of loss of life, casualties, volume of live fire, in Gaza yesterday, and this has been shocking and I think appalling to most of us. It is a familiar, depressingly familiar pattern that we have seen over recent weeks, and it includes the deaths of children. At a highly sensitive time in the region, we call for calm and we call for restraint. A further escalation of violence serves no one's interests. It is only destructive to peace efforts and to wider regional security. Madam President, our position on the status of Jerusalem and the move of the American embassy is well known. Our position is clear and long-standing. It should be the status of Jerusalem should be determined in a negotiated settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and Jerusalem should ultimately be the shared capital of the Israeli and Palestinian states. Our position is clear and long-standing. It should be the status of Jerusalem should be determined in a negotiated settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and Jerusalem should ultimately be the shared capital of the Israeli and Palestinian states. We need to look forward and we need to work urgently towards a resolution of the long-standing issues between Israel and the Palestinian people. Like this Council, the United Kingdom is committed to a two-state solution. Like this Council, the United Kingdom is committed to a two-state solution with Jerusalem as a shared capital and to achieving peace and stability in the wider region. We see negotiations towards a two-state solution as the best way to end the occupation and to meet the national aspirations of the Jewish and Palestinian peoples. But now more than ever, Madam President, we need a political process that delivers a two-state solution. To that end, Madam President, I'd like to close by making a request of the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process that he and his office bring forward proposals to address the situation in Gaza.
And now I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. Moscow is deeply concerned by the escalation of tension in the occupied Palestinian territories. It reached a dangerous level against the background of the ceremony which symbolized the beginning of the transfer of the American embassy from Tel Aviv. This also coincided with the momentous date for all Palestinians, the day of catastrophe, or Nakba. These events have shown yet once again that within the political vacuum, which has been in existence for about 4 years, the appeals to have decisions by force or change the earlier agreements are becoming increasingly high impact and destructive. But they have a very specific price, and the price is expressed in human lives, in tears, in broken lives, and dashed hopes. But irresponsible politicians are not stopped by that. As a result, we end up with a vicious circle when violence follows violence. Given these explosive conditions, there is a need to urgently intensify the efforts by the international community aimed at resuming the political process between the Palestinians and Israelis on the basis of well-known international legal basis. This includes the Security Council decisions and principles which are contained in the Arab Peace Initiative. And the outcome of this should be the implementation of the two-state formula. And the outcome of this should be the implementation of the two-state formula and creating an independent and sovereign Palestinian state with a capital in East Jerusalem. We, on our part, will continue to consistently facilitate the two-state solution approved by the international community for the Israeli-Palestinian settlement. We have offered our mediation offices more than once. We have offered to host a summit between the leaders of Palestine and Israel in order to launch a direct dialogue. And this offer of ours remains in force. The vacuum in constructive international efforts, as was shown by recent events, is very dangerous. We think in particular that it is timely to reactivate the work of the Middle East Quartet, 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 the Middle East Quartet of international mediators, which remains, no matter what anyone says, a universal, unique mediation format. The Middle East Quartet, a universal, unique mediation format. To sum up, I would like to point out the following. Despite the ambitious plans of some international players and their grandiose projects, recently the world, including the region of the Middle East, has not become safer. Many international actions were undertaken which are at variance with international law, and they only compounded the destabilizing tendencies. And the situation in the Palestinian territories now is a good example of the fact that the situation is going in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, in the past days, we have a firm conviction that those who undertake such steps have no intention of changing that direction. We think in particular that it is timely to reactivate the work of the Middle East Quartet of international mediators, which remains, no matter what anyone says, a universal, unique mediation format. We think in particular that it is timely to reactivate the work of the Middle East Quartet of international mediators. We think in particular that it is timely to reactivate the work of the Middle East Quartet of international mediators.
Well, it's interesting that they're mentioning this two-state solution. Again, you know, we take it all the way back to 1993 when those peace accords were entered into. That was also a part of that agreement for, you know, the Jerusalem and the Palestinian people to have their own state in Jerusalem. But that's been a big fighting point for a very long time. Since 1993, September, those agreements were signed. October, they went into effect. They were shut down, you know, 3.5 years later. And it's just been nothing but back and forth, and no actual coming to any of those agreements. And those terms have to be met before they can move forward with it. But neither one of the countries have been willing to really bend to allow these things to move forward.
Right, and it seems like that two-state solution is really going to be the only way that both sides will agree and be satisfied. You know, and many people are presenting that two-state solution, but some are opposing it. They're unwilling to, you know, to let it be.
Yeah, and even many of the U.S. presidents have tried to kind of get the ball rolling again with that peace accords, but for some reason they failed along the lines. But we're seeing things kind of move a little bit closer to it with President Trump, and of course a lot of you know, of course, Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, is standing behind him in his decisions. So we'll see how these things play out, but it's very interesting to see how we're moving a lot closer to these agreements coming to pass in Israel there, and kind of setting up for some other big things in the future.
And we'll see that, you know, President Trump has assigned his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be the main one dealing in that area of trying to establish peace. So it looks like he's going to have a pretty long road ahead of him. Yeah.
And it's interesting enough, too, Yisrael Hawkins has also written a lot about the events taking place in the Middle East in his book, Volumes 1 and 2, Mark of the Beast, that were actually written in the 70s and 80s. Volume 1 was, and Volume 2 was in the 80s. And also the book Birth of the Nuclear Baby, The Explosion of Sin, which kind of gives a timeline of these things from that time up to where we are now, and how all these things are going to play out in regards to man's activities and their governments, bringing us to a time period of all-out nuclear war. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely contact the House of Yahweh for more information.
And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how. To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites. The first one, Yahweh.com, or you can go to YisraelHawkins.com or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to ypnnews.com. If you would like to email the House of Yahweh, you can email them at info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can call the number that's on your screen now. And once again, don't forget to look at the Yisrael Says program by going to YisraelSays.com and the AskYisrael.com, another program. Both excellent tools to help you research any topic in the Holy Scriptures. You'll hear Yisrael Hawkins mention them quite often in his sermons. Go ahead and check them out. You'll be glad you did.
Well, if you're interested in the Scriptures and the Bible prophecies written therein, stay tuned, because up next is Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.